a few reminders for teams as well. There is a timer at the podium. Since you do not have your phones, please be vigilant in timing yourselves because we judges will be busy tracking for the betterment of all teams. So yeah, so that you know when to raise POIs and all of those other formalities. Without further ado, let's welcome the Prime Minister to start this debate. Here.
The empirical fact we need to understand in this debate is that the habatsu was formally dissolved but informally still remain in the Japanese politics. And we say that this is going to be a big preemption to the open air opposition and closing opposition because otherwise probably they cannot stand their case, right? For example, in terms of Kishida habatsu, which is the third biggest habatsu in Japanese politics, they still select who is going to be the prime minister in the post-Ishida era. Aso habatsu still remains in Japanese politics and they have a strong pressure against the Ishida administration and they force Ishida to quit their job, right? All of those things still exist in the current situation and probably formally it has been dissolved but informally it is not really dissolved in the first place. The case coming from opening government is quite simple. Corruption still remains under current situation because this is a superficial solution for because this is a kind of scapegoating by LDP and we are going to provide a fundamental solution for the corruption on our side of the house and so happy to proud to propose. The first thing I want to analyze from opening government is how does the dissolution of habatsu had been deemed by the people on the ground. Number one, people in Japan regard it as a past problem, right? Because, for example, in 2023 and 2024, media regarded that the habatsu is the biggest problem for Japanese politics. It is a fundamental problem of corruption, or people believe that without the existence of habatsu, we can solve all of those problems, right? Habatsu is a kind of symbolic cause of the old corruption problem in Japanese politics, right? And now people forget all of those things, right? Because people's attention shift. Empirically speaking, the most important thing for Japanese politics in 2024, especially in Sangin election, was economic price, right? For example, the rice, price had been double from the last year. The inflation is really serious in Japanese economy, right? The thing here is that people's attention had been shifted and people forget everything about corruption. And this is a problem under current situation, right? And here we see that people forget all of those problems without any fundamental problem. Corruption still exists in Japanese politics and people still feel it's real. People forget all of those things, right? And the nuance I want to add here is that the LDP had a massive incentive to scapegoat those kind of problems, right? Because number one, they have an incentive to remain habatsu still exist on their side of the house, right? Because it is really easy to control every single politician. They're able to, especially older politicians are able to control younger politicians in those contexts, especially when they have habatsu, right? So probably they say that we formally dissolve habatsu, but it still exists in the current situation, right? But secondly, LDP are fucking stupid, fucking horrible, right? Because they know that, they know that the people on the ground are quite busy. People suffer economically. People have day-to-day life, and people forget about the fact very, very soon, right? And this is the exact reason why LDP symbolically say that the dissolution of habatsu has been completed, even though habatsu actually exists informally. And this is the nuance of this argument, and this should be taken as framing, right? And I want to explain how in a world with habatsu, without habatsu, on their side of the house, on our side of the house, external accountability might have been required on our side of the house. First of all, LDP are unable to use our rhetoric. LDP are unable to, say, for example, in the election that we already, dissolved habatsu. There's no symbolic change on our side of the house, right? And media is not going to control, and media is not going to depict all of those things. LDP by themselves are unable to all of those things, right? Particularly in 2024, obviously media and parliament was full of the habatsu, right? So probably in 2023 and 2024, we have focused on the problem of habatsu and problem of corruption, but as time goes by, it has been forgotten. Yeah,
what is the comparative to LDP?
Of course, I'm going to talk about that from now on, right? So the thing here is that external accountability are going to be required. External pressure is going to be required on each side of the house. But because of the symbolic change and symbolic rhetoric of the dissolution of habatsu on their side of the house, people forget about that. And we don't have a fundamental solution for the corruption in a current situation, right? What kind of fundamental solution look like on our side of the house? We say that the most likely alternative is the submission of the monetary usage paper of every single solution, which means that on their side of the house, politicians are still able to hide what kind of, usage they have in terms of money, right? They are able to utilize whatever the money, right? It is fucking stupid, right? Because every single politician is able to use 1 million yen a month in a current situation, and politicians don't need to show what kind of usage is being used, what kind of, for what purpose they have used those kind of resources under the current situation. We say that without that kind of symbolic change of this, dissolution of habatsu, we are going to require that kind of fundamental change on our side of the house, right? And this is the empirical fact, right? Because in 2023, opposition party required ABP to change two things. The first is the dissolution of habatsu, and the second is the submission of the monetary usage paper. And they had a concession, right? ADP escaped from the responsibility. ADP say that we are able to, we are going to dissolve habatsu, and this is the reason why, please concede, and please, stop that, and, opposition party conceded. And this is the empirical fact that on our side of the house, the submission of those kind of, monetary usage paper are going to be required on our side of the house. Do you have any POI? Okay. And I'm gonna explain why this is incredibly important. First of all, corruption is a serious problem in Japanese politics. Obviously, this is principally bad because there's the unfairness between parties, right? Because LDP has a lot of money in order for the campaign election. LDP had a massive money to, for example, parties and many, privileged individuals literally lobby to the LDP, right? And this is quite unfair. And this is the reason why there are so many opposition parties, but it is fractured. And this is the reason why LDP is not really, had a kind of domination in terms of politics in Japanese politics. But obviously it is practically really bad, right? Because people, they literally dissolve the election, right? Because they have a lot of capital and they're able to control everything in terms of Japanese politics. On our side of the house, every single politician are able to, need to submit what kind of usage they had money. And probably the corruption problem is going to be scrutinized more on our side of the house because now we don't have paper and we don't know what kind of usage politicians had in the past and in the current situation, right? But secondly, the problem on their side of the house is that the corruption problem had been more underground because people believe that due to the dissolution of habatsu, it has been fixed. People believe, and media don't really report that because media is obviously have a profit incentive. They want to cater and they want to, talk about the current situation, not the past problem. And insofar as people forget about all of those things, the corruption problem have been regarded as a past problem, right? This is really problematic on their side of the house. On our side of the house, obviously politicians are required to, submit those kind of papers, and this is going to be the empirical alternative on our side of the house. So the crucial thing here is that the corruption problem is the most serious thing because they distort the electoral, result, and this is obviously bad. This is democratically bad, but at the same time, we are going to make the election or all of those things more fair on our side of the house, and this is the reason why we are so happy to proud and stand in Prime Minister.
To open the case for opening off. You're here.
I love you, Abdul!
Okay.
Say love you too.
Love you too.
Yes.
The problem coming from, wait, I'm gonna start. The problem coming from opening government is their alternative is quite speculative. They only have one reason to say, oh, we're just not going to have paper and that is going to reduce corruption.
Okay, you can restart it.
Third time is the charm. Oh, it's like
My timer is writing, starts writing, so do you have any timer?
you can have.
Oh. Are you okay? Thank you. Yes.
Good to start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
The problem with opening government is the only mechanism of change is that you're going to introduce paper. I'm unsure what to much extent this is likely going to reduce corruption. What I'm going to do in my speech is I'm going to prove why to much such a degree having informal habatsu, even at the best case, is likely going to be something that we support. But at second level, why this is likely going to be much better for Japan in general as well. Because understand nothing, opening government is right to point out that Japan is facing a lot of issues. What they never really prove why corruption is the most important issue in general as well. What we propose in opening opposition is the other issues that they have, that is the rise of right wing, the rise of anti-immigration movement that you actually see, but also the rise of inflation are things that Japanese people actively relate much more to, or actively consider much more important in general as well. What we want to pose then is, in instances, if you want to buy opening government, that corruption is something that is more important, we actively think you're likely going to focus more on corruption and likely going to reduce other stuff in general, because it's a trade-off that you need to accept in the debate in general. The second thing that I want to talk about, in terms of how this is likely going to lead to informal habatsu. What I want to establish here, if you read the info slide as well, right now it exists in a structural format, which likely means they have officers in general as well. This likely means the amount of power that they have is likely much more than the power that they're going to have when they exist in informal, because the amount of funding that they're able to raise is likely going to be much more when they have an official title in general as well. How do companies, or how does habatsu fundraise? There are two things that largely happens. One, you have fundraising campaigns, but secondly, you self-fund in general as well. What would be posed coming from opening opposition is oftentimes these organizations, or oftentimes these habatsu actively have individuals that have big names or have official names that actively are apparent in general as well. These two things coming from what happens after 2023. These are often individuals that do hold often a lot amount of capital, but also some political image in general as well, but also public companies in a lot of instances as well. What happened after that is it done damage to their political career as well, but also it damaged their reputation in terms of the companies that they were holding. It actively leads to the stock of their pricing actively going down in general as well. Individual capacity to actively do not donate, or individual trust within those organizations to actively donate to them actively reduces in a lot of instances as well. The implication of this analysis is twofold within the bound. In the presence of this existing formally, the amount of capital that they would be able to give to these LDPT is likely going to be reduced in general as well. The reason this is important, because the only benefit that governments can claim in the round is fundraising in general as well. Because understand, corruption is likely going to exist in a spectrum in general as well. That is something that we're going to dive into. But when this corruption becomes much more easier, the comparative is, on one side of the house, this is official, which likely means your capacity to challenge them is likely something that's limited. On the comparative, it is something that is hidden, which likely means the ability to access corruption is something that is limited. Your ability to do corruption in a lot of instances is limited as well, because you cannot openly do corruption. You cannot say that these are certain expenses that you do. You cannot show these expenses in general as well. LDP also need to show where they get those fundings from. So they need to be quite hidden in the way that they get funding. They cannot get large amount of funding in general as well. And this is what we're going to pause coming from opening government. The second thing that I talk about is, LDP is bad and this is likely going to use this as a rhetoric. We think the problem is, we do think that this is where we're going to bite the hard bullet. We think using this as a rhetoric is fine, because Japanese people already have a lot of problems. This is something that I start with, because they have inflation. They also have a lot of uprising in general as well. If you read the info slide, it says that LDPD actively lose accountability, or actively lose a lot of support in general as well, which likely means LDPD at that moment in time was likely losing support in instances when they're actively aligning with habatsu in general as well. Which means, in that instances, if coming from opening opposition, if they are able to utilize it to make sure that they are into power, because the POI that we asked you what is a comparative, they never really show you. Because if LDPT is not going to be in the power, you're likely going to have right wing coming into power, and we think this is likely going to be much for Japan, which I'm going to build on later on in general as well. We think the symbolic change at best is likely going to be likely good, because you actively are able to make it less worry for individuals in general as well. Because let's be real, no one can stop corruption in Japan, or no one can just make sure that any country is uncorrupt in general as well. So that is not what the delta in this debate is. Before I move on, I'm going to take closing.
Sure, LDP became weak. However, opposition party, which can you on your side, actually shit. So why LDP is bad?
No, you are knifing opening. Your opening says LGBT is bad. We are not saying LGBT is bad. We're saying the other parties that's going to come is going to be bad, because they're likely going to be right wing, and because they come at the approach, they're likely going to have much more power in general as well. The first thing then, how it actively harms LPD in general as well, and why do we want LPD in power? We think quite intuitively, we do think individuals tend to have liberal values more, because they tend to give individuals much more right compared to other values that you tend to focus on, maybe anti-immigration policies in general as well. This specifically means having LDPD not in power actively means that you actively disalign a lot of minorities living in Japan as well, because other parties likely not going to care to them in much more instances as well. These are the individuals that should be the most important individuals in the round, because these are the individuals that can only be benefited by LDPD in general as well. Other individuals are likely going to benefit on both sides of the house, because you do have some incentive to help the majority in general. The reason then this is going to harm LDP in general as well, because even if they were to officialize, or even if they were to do any other alternative, people are still going to hate them because the corruption standard is up. Because the comparative is, people are angry right now because they actively think that you are aligning with someone that is actively corrupt in general as well, which likely means the discourse that you had actively made sure that people hate it to the extent that they do not want your political party to align with it in general as well. The implication of this analysis is, in the presence of you actively trying to unite with LGBT, the trust that you are going to regain is likely going to be much lower of the trust because you're still aligning with that political party. On a comparative, when you actively dissolve it, you're likely going to maintain a higher amount of trust. This higher amount of trust is important for LGBT to then win elections in general as well. But secondly, we don't think this is going to be the only reason that they are going to win elections, because as established earlier, Japanese people not only care about corruption, they also care about inflation in general as well, which likely means if someone just say that, oh, we're going to have less corruption, does not specifically mean that they're going to win the election. They also need to do other factors. This is how governments work. Government just don't win on one racket. They have to show the progress that they're doing. If people don't have food to eat, they're likely not going to vote for corruption in general as well. People have other metrics that actually prioritize in a much more larger degree in general. The implication of this analysis within the round is quite simple. In the presence of having this, the counterfactual is likely going to be worse because you have LGBT that is going to have less power in general as well. Why then, on the principle level, this is wrong? We think to a much larger degree, and this is something that we're going to argue, having this organization specifically is something that we think is against the democratic values that should exist in general as well. The reason behind that is quite simple. These institutions hold a lot of power. They have the power of organizations. They can patronage, they can fundraise, they can control ministries in general as well. All of this is something that is against democracy in general as well. In instances when you're actively able to make sure that these individuals are dissolved, you're able to reduce the power, because even as mentioned earlier, if they are dissolved, the amount of power that they have is likely going to be much limited than the amount of power that they have right now, which is something that we want coming from OO. The reason that we win the round is we're able to establish that any other alternative that you're going to come gap in the absence of LGBT is likely going to be much more worse. But instances having informal likely means you're going to have less power than having it formally. For all of these reasons, OO.
Thank you so much for that speech. Now let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to close the case for opening government. Here.
Okay. Your time begins in 3, 2, 1, start. Directly against OO, assuming corruption is not priority in this debate, are going to take another stance from DPM, saying that official existence of habatsu is something good, contributing to long-term stability and support of the LDP, but an official level of corruption, an official level of existence of habatsu is oftentimes contributing to the delay of decision makings, making it hard for minority opinions to belong to like the opinion of LDPs, allows lots of populistic party like Sensei-to to be elected in Japan, and we think if we take OO's goal about long-term stability of the government, this can be rather achieved on our side of the house. To avoid contradiction, to avoid contradictory evaluations, we're gonna say saying that political party is good or bad is something quite inaccurate. Like oftentimes they have lots of good perspective and bad perspectives, so even if I argue some generally good point of LDP, this is not contradicting with my PM. Two things in my speech. Firstly, how this weakens the power of LDP, why this bad for long-term political stability of Japanese economies. Secondly, I want to argue, like extending our PM, how the dissolution and reform of corruption is fundamentally different, and this is going to be used as a scapegoat. Moving on to first argument. So first thing I'm going to prove is official existence of habatsu has been contributing to long-term stability and electoral power of LDP in 3 ways. Firstly, habatsu were able to have a strategic control of votes in elections because 30% of Japanese population belong to Jimin Toin. They have been belong to control voting groups, and they were able to be ruled as a subgroup of LDP. They were able to control which politicians are going to be elected, which politicians are going to run in which political groups, and this is how LDP has been controlled and to maximize the amount of power and the seats they gain. But secondly, Japanese populations were able to vote into LDP even if they have internally conflicting different two opinions. LDP did not have to show their official stance because they could say there are lots of different conflict opinion within our parties. So if you support one over opinion, you can vote your parties. This is how they have been maximizing the amount of votes. But thirdly, an internal individual level conflict, individually leaving this party has been avoided because for individuals, instead of leaving the entire LDP, instead of like creating new political parties, it's much better to decide to move to another habatsu, which avoided individuals, politicians from leaving from these parties. But lastly, fourth reason is that this makes it easier to gain the large amount of donation and political support. This is how they have been gaining stabilities. Why is it impossible on their side of the house? Because obviously vote allocation is no longer possible. Even if generally lots of people believe in LDP, they just randomly vote because they're not told in which political party, in which politician they have to vote on their side of the house. Which means largely the amount of support that LDP gains decreases on their side of the house. What's the impact? 4 things. Firstly, a long-term stable government cannot be achieved on their side of the house. If they want to say that the support of LDP decreases, they never show any alternative. Like there are lots of terrible alternatives like Minshuto, Rikken Minshuto, or like Sanseito, who have never ruled the Japanese politics, who have failed in like tsunami, like 2011 earthquakes, who is gaining lots of amount of support through like chaotic and anti-immigration, like far-right policies. We think if LDP don't have to care about this kind of electoral other issues, they can focus on long-term projects. They don't have to care about long 4-year electoral terms. They don't have to use such short-term incentive to gain populist vote. For example, taking an economic policy to distribute lots of monies. For example, they don't have to lower the tax anymore. They don't have to deal with like genpatsu issues in Japan. Like they don't have to care about this kind of populistic actions. But secondly, the largest benefit is that LDP do not have to form a coalition uniquely on our side of the house. The alternative is, as I told you, lots of terrible opposition parties who do not even have a ruling experience, who are just always criticizing what LDP is doing. I never believe what the alternative is being better. So the third impact is we are both able to have quicker decision making internally within LDPs because people having different opinions within LDPs are already ruled in the formal hierarchies, and people are able to internally adjust their opinion quicker, while on their side probably individualistic opinions are going to be just randomly assigned, and this leads to later decision makings. Yes.
Do you support LDP always being dependent on habatsu?
So we are saying that that's at least much better than alternative, where people's voices are all individualized and already powerful and old individuals are dominating the opinion of the LDPs. So, but second extension I want to make is internal reform and liberalization of LDP will be harder on their side of the house, because if LDP is anyway ruling the party, if we take the best case scenario of their side and they're anyway the leader of Japanese economy, probably the liberalization, reflection of minor and young votes opinions would be possible only on our side of the house. Because if these young people cannot belong to habatsu, there's no way for them to reflect their minor opinion, their personal opinion into the decision making of LDP's policy makings. Because old individuals, leaders of this previous habatsu, already have a large voice within these political parties. Therefore, even if after habatsu have been abolished, they still have a large voice into the entire policy making of the habatsu in the first place. Therefore, people will have an informal gain. On our side, people by belonging to habatsu, they will be able to have a formal voice, opportunity of voice out. They will be able to talk to the direct voice in an individualistic room or such things. We think that's much better in terms of reflecting young people, minority opinion into the largest ruling parties. Extending my PM. So I told you why the trade-off exists between the fundamental reform of corruption and dissolution, dealing with corruption issues. There are 3 reasons. Firstly, we told you people's attention are limited. People are not so wise. If people believe this problem has been solved, they don't care about this anymore. Secondly, media has an active incentive to scapegoat because lots of powered individual in the LDP has a large connection with media. They try to do an aggregation and negotiation in order to see as if this problem has been solved. But third important thing is that this is also going to be as a negotiation in politics. The point opposition missed is that even opposition party like Rikken Minshu are probably also in corrupted situation. Therefore, it's quite unfavorable for these political parties to show to fundamentally reform the corruptive situation in the first place. Even opposition parties do not want to increase their transparency. Why is this so? This is because there's no other alternative. Only thing that media and population can do is to require a direct solutions. But secondly, we also directly deal with the corruption that exists in the whole Japanese economy through fundamental solutions, which even exist in the opposition party, which also exist in corporations. These actors cannot escape from this corruptive problem by just saying that the ODP have to deal with this habatsu issues. What the problem of underground corruption? We told you two things. This makes investigation harder because under government side, a centralized control actor of this corruption already exists. The police, the court can directly investigate into the central leader of this corruption when they believe this is socially harmful. While on their side of the house, a more individualistic and hidden level corruption happens, even if that's socially problematic, it's hard for police officers to investigate on their side of the house. In the end, what's important is that we have already admitted that corruption has been a large issue in policies, and opposition cannot ignore and cannot just say this is something we don't have to deal with because this is a principal democratic issue. This has been literally harming people's lives and corruptions. So the only thing we have to do here is like paper of like monetary usage, which is the only solution on our side. Propose.
Okay, thank you so much for that speech. PM now calling on the DLO to close the case for opening on. Here.
Just 30 seconds.
DLO?
Hi guys, Hamza here, Hide. For PI's CG, please ask one after the 15-minute mark. And starting my debate in 3, 2, 1. Whenever there is such a big scandal or like political crisis that happened in 2023, the only way you can actually you can run from it, or for instance you can actually get away with it, is to tell to the people that we don't stand with it, we won't tolerate it, and we will not, for instance, try to, for instance, tolerate this or even, for instance, sustain this model in the very first place. Japan has a lot of educated middle class who actually know, for instance, that they are voting, they have a lot of access to things like intellectual capital and all of things. You can't just say that they will forget and everything and you can just play it dumb and all of these things. This is like the major tipping point, I guess, in this debate, because Japanese people are not that dumb as opening government talking about. Secondly, corruption scandal is not an isolated incident. Please understand one thing. When there is a corruption scandal, it also has a snowball effect, because now people know that the reason why we are not getting job because of these people, the reason why we have high inflation because these ministers are messing up the funds and all of these things. So this is the reason why all of the hate that is existing right now in the Japanese is not the isolation system of the corruption. It is actually due to all of these people. All of these things will happen in the very first place because they were, for instance, doing corruption. They were not giving us welfare. They were just playing the political game rather than actually doing something substantial for us. I think this is like the reason why this is a political suicide for the LPD, when they're able to, for instance, tolerate this system and they want to bring this back. And understand one thing, this debate has a certain nuance. Habatsu before 2023 and Habatsu after 2023 are two unique identity actors. Why? Habatsu may have like a lot of political leverage and all of these things before 23. But when the corruption happened, it was such a big scandal in Japanese. All over the world knew about it. All the educated middle class and everyone in the Japanese knew about it. It has major implications for this. Because number one, these people were online. These people were shamed everywhere. Their pictures were being showed on the news channels, many media channels, many people, many, for example, political leaders came out and talk shit about these people. But like, secondly, more importantly, we also need to understand that now if they are, for instance, dissolute and if they have like so many corruption charges, they cannot use their political leverage openly as well, because now they have to hide it or they have to use like inside means and all of this thing. So their capacity to exert or their capacity to exert themselves as the kingmaker of Japanese politics is pretty much lessened as well, because now people hate them. Many political leaders don't want to associate with them. I think this is like the major reason why you cannot. And by the way, if opening government cases, they are so strong, they are everywhere, they have a lot of capital, I am still not sure that how they are able to hold them accountable in the very first place as well. All of their impacts only exist in a world where habatsu act as a nice boy for you, and they will do everything that you are telling them. They will be, for instance, be transparent. They won't use their power in an unfair way and all of this thing. If they are strong, I don't think like opening government case has any solvency on their side of the world, because these people will come up. These people will again, for instance, politicize everything. They will use their leverage to, for instance, hold a lot of politics. They will do a lot of corruption. This is like the major issue that is present in the opening government case as well. But understand one thing, that this is like the major debate of this debate as well. According to the info slide, Japanese people are like super mad about the politician. People hated them. According to them, people like super angry because of things like inflation and all of these things. Their model is, we will bring back another issue and we will tell the people, aha, they were corrupt, but now they are our good boys and we will, for instance, have them. Understand one thing, when you are already in trouble, you don't bring another trouble. You don't give another reason to the people to hate you, because now there results in a snowball of impacts that it's not only about inflation, it's not only about, it's not only, for instance, about immigration. It also becomes out corruption, that these people are corrupt as well, because now they're bringing back their old corrupt friends to actually do all of these things. So this snowball effect actually makes things even bad for LPD, because now you have another big reason that you have to care about, and only their case was only sustainable where they were able to that habatsu has the capacity to solve all these big issues in the very first place. If they don't tell all of these things, I am still not sure that why habatsu is even, for instance, useful in the very first place as well. And now let's deal with the comparative part, that how this LPD existed, all of these things, by the way. And understand one thing, and by the way, if like corruption existed, all of these things, okay, perfectly fine. I think if corruption can't be solved on both sides of the world, it's perfectly fine. But I think the unique point opening opposition has said, denouncing them formally is actually good, because now you are able to say that we don't align with his policy and these people are so fucking bad that you don't want to tolerate them. I think you are able to have a unique political leverage on our side of the world. Second idea, that why LPD would be healing on our side of the world. I think understand one thing, when a political party is, for instance, receiving hate for a lot of things, immigration, inflation and all of this thing, you need some sort of a political leverage to provide you some sort of cushion in the shit that you are getting. I think your stance against corruption, or you were able to, for instance, show to the public that we took us so much big damage just to preserve the democratic structure of Japan, just to, for instance, show to the people that we don't tolerate with corruption. I think all of these things, or all these narratives, are actually good. That provides you a lot of cushion when you're getting so much hate from the local people as well. Because now, for instance, even if you're facing a lot of issues, this provides you a cushion that yes, we took a stance against corruption, we took a stance against things like, for instance, the political positions and patronage system that was happening around us. And this is like the major reason why I think LPD has some sort of healing ground or some sort of cushion that can actually they can leverage in outward lower decisions. But like secondly, LPD is not dumb. LPD is actually a very famous political party, so this means they have access to a lot of intellectual capital as well. What do I mean by this intellectual capital? Number one, Syrian politicians who have access to things like grassroots politics. A lot of, for instance, people from academia who are, for instance, they're part of them. A lot of technocrats, for instance, who are, for instance, around them, or who are, for instance, being part of their for their parliament or all of these things. This means that number one, they have access to a lot of individuals, they have access to a lot of intellectual capital that number one has the, for instance, incentive, or that have the capacity to solve a lot of issues, because now they can come up with different policies, they can come up with different things that can actually save them from all of these things. Yes.
We gave you a fundamental solution to corruption, which is transparency of monetary usage. If voters are so wise as you say, that can be conducted on either side of the house, and we don't understand what the delta is.
Number one, perfect. First of all, understand one thing. Publicly denouncing them is a unique political leverage that you get from opening opposition side of the world. But like secondly, according to your side, many of the corruption is so strong. I'm still not sure how this accountability even makes sense in the very first place. And you are how to hold them accountable as the way as you're assuming on their side of the world. But lastly, the reason why, for instance, LPD is actually facing a lot of issues, because most of their policies are not materializing into the politics as well. Why? Because a lot of the funds that they allocate, this habatsu organization tries to bargain for different allocations, because they have a lot of bargaining power with the structures as well. So even though, for instance, LPD wants to make good policies for the people, they want to have more welfare and all of these things, this habatsu organization wants more political favor. This is the reason why, for instance, that number one, this is against the democratic principle of the Japanese people, because now their will is not being materialized into the very first place. But like secondly, all the good things that the white PD that has the capacity to do, they have this extra barrier of this habatsu organization that acts as a more deterrent, that acts as more red tapeism within this party as well. So I think their capacity to exert themselves as a political party and the capacity to actually do all of stuff would be more better on our side of the world when we're able to denounce them publicly. For all these reasons,
motion, now calling on the member of government to open the case for CG. Here.
I prefer take PY from opening if we have. Starting 3, 2, 1. Let's begin with a clarification. We believe PM's actual framing is actually literally lie. Things like informally, so like the habatsu still exists and so on. This is literally lie because firstly, after the Ichiba resigned the leaders, there's more candidates exist within the LDP, right? Because who are not to be a next president and so on. This is evidence, the reason why habatsu at least have a weak power and so on. Secondarily, as all pointed out, patronage connection actually disappear with a weak at least. Things like labor union on their side of the house, historically in the past, like each labor union and each corporation have a strong connection with the have at least as all pointed out, those corporations now care about the reputation to connect with such a each habatsu and also having a ceremony or the party with such a habatsu. This means at least habatsu became really weak and so on. So PM's framing is actually lie. Okay, then 3 arguments. Firstly, we prove why we have a better solution to corruptions as consensus purpose in this debate. Secondarily, we also talk about why patronage actually reforms LDP, and lastly, we prove why LDP is better actors. First argument, we believe corruption is actually worse on their side and accountability is better on the house because we believe on the counterfactor, on the individuals get their own money by the corporation or by the individuals and so on, which means the delta in this debate is that whether or not the habatsu collectively gets the money from the corporations or the individual gets the money for their own individual benefit. Then opening government solution is actually so shit because about the lack of the submission of each individual report, this is completely symmetric. It is already happened in the 10 years ago, and more importantly, it doesn't relevant to the absence of the diversity. Anyway, on the government counterfactor, those things might happen. That is out of this debate. Then 3 reasons why our side is better. Firstly, individual politician will be kicked out on our side from the diversity if they individually get the money from the corporations, because not on our side, since the media strongly report about these events, now we're gonna have each habatsu have a strong incentive to care about the reputations. Those habatsu have a strong incentive to kick out the individuals from the habatsu if this individual politician gets the money. This is the reasons why individual must care about such as the habatsu or the kicked out from the habatsu, because if you are kicked out, you literally have no chance to be a president with no chance to make the policies and so on. You must care about it. But secondarily, also individual scandal and corruption is actually more invisible. On the government side, on their side, habatsu opens a party at a really large extent. Habatsu already opens a ceremony with 100 members and so on. This is more obvious and visible, and more importantly, things like the investigations are more easier in such a many actually involved with the party and so on. On their side, individuals have a connection individually. They are likely to go to just a good individual have a more so those things individually that is more invisible. Lastly, more profitability for the individual candidate, which means on our side, as already explained, if habatsu exists, individuals do not get the money from the corporations because it is less profitable, it is less incentive, because if you do it, you obviously can't get the benefit. But more importantly, habatsu gets the money, but those money do not go to the individuals. So individuals have a less incentive to do it in the first place. But on their side, individuals have now incentive to corrupt with the corporation each other. Because if individually you have a more huge money, you have a more electability individually. This is the reasons why individuals have a more massive incentive to corrupt on their side and do not exist on our side of the house in the first place. Counterfactual is very simple. We believe habatsu likely to have a better strict rules on the individual behavior, and because from the like media reporting those things in the history and so on. And also more importantly, even if they get some money, we prove why those money will go to the policy making or at least better for the society. Then this is the reasons why actually corruption is better on our side because accountability more exists and I have actual reasons. Yeah. Then second argument, why patronage systems likely to leave for the LDP? Note, because the profit is now unpredictable for the corporations to connect with each habatsu, because it is, even if PM's framing is true, at least this is now informal. LDP cannot publicly talk about those habatsu policy with how to make the policy from the habatsu and so on. They can't do it publicly. In such cases, corporations firstly have a less incentive to connect with each habatsu in the first place, but secondarily, they believe, even if I gave the money for the LDP with this habatsu, my policy do not pass through down such an LDP system in the first place because habatsu is at least publicly kicked out. So, which means, I think corporations have a more care about such an unpredictability on the LDP and likely to leave from the LDP in the first place. The other consequence, firstly, LDP simply lose the money from the corporation. Secondarily, also LDP directly lose the vote because the Japanese citizens have a historical tendency to vote for the LDP because your corporation is belong to the LDP. Note, for example, any individuals who are working on the work corporation will definitely vote for the LDP because your corporation have a benefit from the LDP. This is the reasons why people like to vote on the labor union levels and labor corporation levels. Then, there is the reasons why patronage network is better. But before that, yes.
Yeah. What is the benefit of habatsu then?
Yes, I take already. Firstly, we believe reciprocal benefit likely to kick in on us as a house. Those things is likely to happen for the citizens and laborers. Why is the counterfactual? On their side, firstly, LDP have no connections, which means LDP do not make the policy for the corporation or the citizens in the first place. They just try to just populist measure, just giving the money for the individual or something like that. Those things actually escalate the inflation that all talks about. Secondarily, corporation might do it individually, which means corporation, instead of giving the money to the habatsu, they might give money for the individual politicians or the individual opposition party and so on. However, insofar as individuals have no capacity to pass the policy in the first place, this predictability, this profitability is actually weak. Lastly, also on their side, even if individual corporation can give the money for the individual politicians and this individual politician win on the elections, this benefit only go to the specific corporation who gave the money to this one strongest individuals. This is the reasons why total benefit for the Japanese citizens actually decrease. On our side, firstly, we have a more accountability for the policy making because labor union group of the corporations gave the money for the LDP. LDP is become more accountable to the making policy. If fail, LDP and habatsu lose such electability in the next election. Secondarily, also we have a more scale of the benefit for the individuals. Any labor unions unify each other and likely to search for the lowest common benefit for each laborers and each workers. Those things uniquely occur once the house. Habatsu is the most largest block which can cater to the most largest citizens, labor, and so on. For those reasons, we take this debate.
So much for that speech, member of government. Now calling on the member of opposition to open the case for CO. Here.
Just okay.
So, okay. So starting my speech in 3, 2, 1.
let's be clear about the counterfactual, how it looks like. I think it looks like the random groups, which is more fluctuating member, no particular public list of the members, or no particular records of specific conferences, or no particular scrutiny of these conferences exist on their side of the house. Why it's bad is because I think if you see the example of like ABP Council last day, and if you have no public document about what happens in the discussion, and suddenly malware goes eligible, then we get anger. That is what you support in your side of the house. Then I'm going to respond to the closing opposition firstly. 4 responses. Firstly, their stance is somehow contradictory to opening opposition because opening opposition said in their side of the house they have publicly announced they delineate themselves from the corruption by like the making parties diversified and like diversified version of like I don't know some groups, and this is somehow contradictory to what closing opposition said on their side of the house. We should talk not about the corruption but about like the foreign policies or immigrants policies. Somehow I think it's contradictory. But secondly, I think like the media is likely to focus on the most specifically preferable topic for the each individual citizens because they have incentive to get more viewers, such as if the immigrants is an issue of the politics, then they have to cater to that, not like the boring conference of the internal politics inside LDP movement. But the third thing to say is they only assumes that the centrist party is LDP, but there's other centrist parties such as Riken Minshito in the Japanese political context. If LDP is fluctuating and somehow loses the power in their side of the house, maybe it's good for the other centrist the political parties to push into the politics and make a stance like we are also the centrist party and go vote for us. And last thing to say is about, they said political polarization happens. This is untrue because in the status quo, what's happening is LDP is now having too much power and the opposition party have to make a stance to differentiate from that. If the LDP's power is less, they have to make a correlation with the big party, even with the left-wing party. In the status quo, the left-wing centrist Riken Minshito is the best party to correlate with because they have the second largest seat and like the one diet. That's why I think more not polarization, but more integration of the policy between the left-wing and right-wing is likely to happen in our side of the house. Moving on to the opening position, what they said, publicly announcing like the diversion of the group and publicly announcing the cancel of the habatsu is good. I think it's symmetric in the first place. Why? Because in our side of the house, we can announce our habatsu have specific counseling policy to the specific politicians who cater to specific like corporations or committed some types of scandals. Then this is very likely scenario in our side of the house because the habatsu obviously have incentive to maintain the power to show the public image good in the first place. But second thing to say is their policy is likely to backfire. Why? Because if you raise the intentions, if you raise the pressurization to like you are not committing to any types of corruption or you're not having any types of the meeting which show the sign of the habatsu, then it is a time, even if you have the individual dinner with the small like the 3 politicians group or 5 politicians group, then even these meetings or just having the lunch or having the dinner, it's regarded as a sign of the corruption in their side of the house because the pressurization that like the habatsu in and of itself is bad, and we should delineate from that. It would increase the pressure in their side of the house. Their policy is likely to backfire. But secondly, to say, if the people cares about politics is not the corruption but about the exact policy, I think their policy is bad. Why? Because people cares about their ordinary life. Why? Which means if there's more habatsu, if there's internal fraction in their side of the house, but the decision-making process is likely to be delayed. This is obviously perceivable for the most of the people in the status quo, which means they have longer time to pass the policy, which means it decreases like the quality of life because some policy is not taken in their side of the house. But second thing to say is if there is no controlling or ruling habatsu in their side of the house, I think the investors or foreign investors' incentive to investing in Japan also decreases because we cannot have any predictability what types of political party rules in the first place. So if the incentive of the people is about like the having more better life, then it contradicts to like the making about like some fraction in their side house. The next thing they said is principle, but I think one
they said corruption anyway happens in both sides, so I think the principle about having habatsu is very unlikely to stand. But two, we have explained, we have better mechanism to exclude the people from the habatsu and have mechanism to make people accountable in outside the house. I think this overrides their principle also. Last thing to talk about is opening government. They said habatsu informally exists. One, it is maybe unlikely because there's no formal conferences, more scrutiny about what the people is meeting and where the money comes from. This is, I think, even if we take the best case of their side house, I think the decrease of the power and more fraction is very likely scenario. But two, it is simply uncharitable compared to our stance. We have said, even if there's completely fractured groups of the people, it is bad because we cannot hold them accountable. We cannot have the public document of themselves. We cannot cancel them, even if they committed to the specific types of the corruptions. So the only thing they said is the people are eluded from the image like the past there is habatsu, but still there's corruption problem, but not caring about the corruption problem in a status quo. I think this mechanism it's about the voters' incentive. Our mechanism is about the internal political parties' incentive. You have incentive not to be cancelled and excluded from the political habatsu in outside the house. Why? Because you cannot be listed in the proportionate representation election in outside the house. You cannot get any political and electoral support from the which is coming to the habatsu in outside the house. If there's a random groups of people and anyway there's no benefit by belonging to the habatsu and the people easily change one group to the another group even if you committed to some specific corruptions, that is the moment you will lose the incentive to make people accountable. Why this mechanism overrides the OG mechanism about the voters' incentive? Because the people and the voters and having the usual life have easily forget the thing which has happened in the past. Compared to that, inside the political party, they are always thinking about the political stance. I think this mechanism is more long-lasting if you're excluded from the specific habatsu. But the next thing they say is about LDP becomes stronger, but the actual mechanism we have provided is more patronages does not exist. Why this mechanism overrides the case? Because one, how people perceive the political party is coming from the media. Who controls the media? Companies, which is why our patronage system is very override the OG's mechanism. And also people have very loyalty to the company. That's why people perceive the political party also. I'm very proud to stand for CG. Thank you.